Mike Pegg here again. Big Deal Custom Shops. Got a few things going on. You guys have been kind of keeping up with this one, so you are familiar with the Exploder. Big shop, not a lot of tools, but I get a lot done. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about using soldering irons and soldering tools today. I have been soldering for 30-something years. Used to do a lot of hobbies, building weird stuff, so I thought I would share a few insights on that and help out as much as I can for you guys who struggle with soldering, because it can be a little frustrating if you're not sure of what you're doing and how to go about it. What I have is an Urson multi-core solder. It's 0.036 inches. It's very thin. It adheres extremely well to copper and tin coated copper, which would be such as this capacitor. You can see it's kind of shiny, almost a chrome, but it's actually copper with tin on it. Same way with your switches and your pins on your potentiometers, just tin coated. Well, sometimes it might have a nickel base, but I also use a Metcal soldering station. This is a controlled temperature station, a little expensive. Has a soldering iron with a multi-changing tip. I do this professionally though for my job, so I use a lot of high dollar stuff, but you can do this with just about any soldering kit out there, like the ones you can get at Hobby Lobby or anywhere like that. Okay, the key to soldering is temperature and patience. Patience is a key, alright? A lot of times you're going to find yourself soldering and you're going to wish you had 4 or 5 hands, but I'm going to show you a little trick. I'm going to take my soldering iron, and I'm going to set it down here just a little off center, and I'm just going to hold that there. Alright? Find yourself a small sharp tipped item, small flathead screwdriver, anything, okay? And keep it handy off to the side. Alright, now once you get your temperature starts coming up, you're going to take your solder and you're going to apply it to the, I do it to the edge of the side of the tip. Alright, and just slowly push it in there, okay? Take your hand, take your little sharp edge object, remove your soldering iron and hold that in place until it cools off. And it should be a very shiny color, not dull like what you had when you were originally putting it on there. And then you'll end up with that look right there. Alright, once I do that, I take my control dikes and nip that off. Now I don't have to try to hold this to keep that capacitor in place on the other side. You're going to do the same thing here. You're going to put your tip right on the center of that hole and let that thing sit there for a few seconds. Keep your hands away from the stuff. I know I read some comments that you guys burn yourselves a lot. There's no reason for you to put your hands on this stuff and get burned. Alright, after it's placed a few seconds, you'll see a little smoke rise. You're going to dab it, just dab it and pull back a few times and then release. Alright, if you see a bubble like that right there, you need to take your soldering iron. That means it didn't get hot everywhere. Alright, and then what it should do is it should make a nice, smooth, shiny pattern on that. And that's when you know that you had good adherence. And then you can just clip it, and ta-da, you've got your cap in place. Alright. As far as wires go, I use a very small gauge multi-conductor copper. Alright. It's stranded wire. It's about 20 gauge, maybe 22 gauge, I would say. But it has multiple conductors. Okay, and same way applies. Now, A lot of people will pre-solder these, and I'll show you a little demonstration on this, on how that happens. You're just going to get, what I'll do is I'll put both these in the same fingertip, close together. You're going to heat this copper up. I just gently rub back and forth. Alright, just let that thing heat up. If you feel it getting warm on your fingers, you're probably there. I'm going to take a little of this solder and rub it on the tip of my soldering iron, and then I'm going to repeat that process on the wire. And what you should see is that solder begins to soak in to that copper until you have a really nice, smooth, coated piece of wire. And you should end up like that. You'll end up with some wire that's already pre-coated and ready to go. And the good thing about doing that is when I pre-coat these, I've already got a little solder on my wire, so when I stick it in one of these holes for these and bend it over, I can take and hit it with my soldering iron, and it will help to hold that wire in place a little bit to keep me from struggling, needing that third hand, getting that wire to stay in place while I do it. Okay, as you see, I've got two reds here already attached to my tone pot. They're not soldered in. One of these will be going to the volume pot, and the other one will be going to my 5-way switch. Okay, so I take and pre-bend them over a little bit once I put them in the hole, and that way they kind of stay, and just lean them back. Now we don't need that third hand again like most of you guys are always talking about needing, because that does get to be a pain in the butt sometimes. Alright, and then again I'm going to apply the tip of my soldering iron to the hole metal and not to the actual copper, because the copper will heat up on its own just from the pressure and the temperature I'm putting on the pot. And then as I do that, I will slowly dab a little bit. Don't pound it with a lot of solder, okay, because that's really not doing anything. Too much solder is not a good thing. You end up with globs, and sometimes you end up with cold solder joints, which typically will either crack or not stay, and then you have to try to get all that solder off. And there you have it. I have two wires, and you notice I didn't glob a bunch of solder on there. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on there getting that thing warm. I just did what I did with a little dab here and there, and doing that. Okay, now the biggest thing I see with people and that would be with grounds. Okay, I hear more people complain about struggling to get a ground to stick to the top of these pots, and it is rather difficult. Okay, I usually strip my wire back the same length as the top of my potentiometer. If I'm using it just as the ground on, say, this switch, I just do a little bit like I did over here on this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that if you keep your soldering iron on here for too long, you're going to end up melting the interior parts or causing damage to this potentiometer. So you have to have a soldering iron that's pretty decent. But what you want to do, rather than hold it on the metal like I did over here, I'm actually going to use this and set it on top of the copper and hold it down. Another good time to have your little sharp object out and handy. Alright, so right now my copper is getting hot before my top, which is going to be a problem, because the top is not going to want to absorb the solder as fast as the wire, which is okay. That's what we want to do in this situation. So I'm going to do my little trick here where I just do little globs, just little bits at a time on each side of the soldering iron. Alright, because I want the wire to soak up this solder and not so much the top. Okay, take my little sharp object and I'm going to use that to hold this down. Alright, and then I'm going to take the solder that is stuck to my wire and I am going to rub back and forth really gently on this potentiometer on the top, because I've already got the solder on the wire, but it's not wanting to stick to the pot. Well, after about a minute of rubbing back and forth, what it does is it starts to bite into that tin, and there you have it. Now you have your copper connected to your tin, which is a pain in the butt sometimes. And since most of us have multiple grounds going to the volume potentiometer, like I will, the one coming off the tone, the one coming off the switch, the one coming from the bridge on the guitar, I will lay those side by side across here and do that same rubbing method. That way what's already on this pot will absorb into the next copper wire with a little bit of solder from my spool, and then the next wire and the next wire and the next wire until I have them all, and then I'll run one from there down to the front where my volume knob potentiometer connects also. Okay, we've kind of got the principles down, but I want to show you one more thing, and I'm going to just solder two pieces of wire together that I've stripped against a piece of wood because it's just easy. Alright, so you're going to take your two pieces of wire, get them to overlap, and hold them down with your soldering iron. Just leave it sit there. Let it sit for a minute and warm up. After you feel pretty confident, you don't want to leave it so long that it starts cooking back the insulation on these wires. So I'll start doing my little patented dab, just a little dab there, come around the other side, dab a little there, take my little sharp edge, put it on there. I'm just going to hold that for a second and blow on it. Okay, and you should have a fairly clean solder joint. You see how shiny that is? And I can tug on these pretty hard. They're not coming apart. The great thing about this is now you can take a piece of shrink wrap, which is what I usually use, and put over them if you need to extend them. But the same principle applies on this that you're going to do on anything else. Like a serious comprehensive soldering tutorial, but I want to give you an idea of how simple it can be. And I know a lot of you are struggling out there. You're globbing your solder on, you're forcing it, you're burning your hands, you're doing things like that. I just wanted to show you quickly and keep this short and sweet to let you know that you don't have to go through all that. You don't have to fight with this. You know, this little bit of setup here. It's a 2x4 with some holes drilled in it. I know several of you guys have got some cool fancy templates, and that's awesome. I have nothing against it. I think that's great because then you can have your wires pre-length and everything for what you're putting the guitar into, and that's a great idea for you other guys out there who are looking for something like that. Just know though that patience is the key on this. Not too hot, definitely not too cold. You can use anything on the market. You don't have to have a high dollar Metcal or any of the other fancy brands out there. You can go to anywhere and get what you need. Your solder though is the key. Good solder is worth its weight in gold because it will melt consistently, it'll spread consistently, and it will make contact with your other surfaces consistently. So don't try to go out and buy a $5 roll of solder or a $2 roll of solder or something that you're going to sweat copper with like on a water line. That is not what you want. I hope this helped you some. If you have questions, please feel free to ask me anytime. I've been in the electronics game a long time, 31 years professionally, and as a hobbyist from a kid since probably the mid-70s. So I've got a little bit of insight and knowledge on potentiometers, switches, phasing, magnets. Everything that's inside this guitar I can do overkill, and that's why I usually do multiple switches and have inverters and coil taps and all that stuff in all my guitars I build, because I like options. I like a player to have options. I like for a guy to pick up a guitar and have 10 different guitar sounds. I mean, anybody can put 3 pickups in or 2 pickups in a guitar and get 1 or 2 sounds. But that's what sets us apart. We're custom guys. We're builders. We do things that you can't buy at the store. And that's why I do what I do, because I want a guy to smile and say, wow, this guitar just blows my mind. And I know that's what you guys are looking for too. So I really appreciate you listening. Thanks for your time, and I love being able to help out. You guys are great. This is a really good forum. The guys, Erez especially, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this and putting this together for us to encourage one another and to help get things done that we can't always get done on our own. Y'all have a great week. Be safe out there.